I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.
Welcome to Cookies, the world's most influential basketball podcast. I am Ben Dietrich. Jordan Rodelli is on vacation. But Andrew Quo, fortunately for all you dear listeners, no days off. Andrew Quo, what's new?
Monday. Ben, now I love Mondays because it's a beautiful day out in New York City today. I'm trying to stay positive. Start another week of this, man. We can do this.
Did you have a big weekend?
Huge. You can't even imagine how big my weekend was. I deleted like 6,000 emails from my server last night. It took me 4 hours. It was incredible. You should have been there, Ben.
That is exciting.
Woo!
I drove around the city quite a bit. And
what's the vibe?
It's peak car ownership hours. With the scourge of alternate side parking banished.
Sort of like the scourge of Jabril Okafor being banished from the NBA.
Much the same. But no alternate side parking. The roads are relatively empty because no one's here and no one wants to go anywhere and there's nowhere to go. So if you want to just drive with no particular destination, it's a kind of nice little activity to do. Because normally driving around New York is a pain in the ass. But you're trying to go somewhere that you want to be. This is the exact opposite. With no end result or no goal in driving, it is now, ironically, a far better pastime.
How does our beautiful city look these days?
It's kind of cool because there's no one around, but it's also super sad because everyone's scurrying around the streets with masks on. You know, I went through Soho and everything's just shut down. There's Balthazar with, wood over the windows or whatever they're doing. It's grim. But it's also kind of nice as someone who lives in Brooklyn to sort of see the city in this state because otherwise I wouldn't see it. I'm not going there. There's no reason to. But driving around, it's like looking at the West Village and looking at the East Village and going through the Lower East Side and Chinatown. And there's nothing going on, but it does create a feeling of civic unity in a way.
It's kind of stony when you think about New York City as like an Eyes Wide Shut or Seinfeld Hollywood movie set. And it's not because it's what these things are based on and New York City is alive and it's not a prop. But when you see it kind of this way, it kind of messes my brain up, and I kind of think of it as like some weird conspiracy or what's the right word? I overuse the word simulation, but it's odd to see something that was alive just present itself in a dormant state. Especially
in daylight hours, because when people marvel at seeing New York City empty, I'm like, so you've never been out at like 5 a.m. on a Tuesday? Like,
right.
There's no one out there. Walk down Broadway at 5 a.m. on a Tuesday. No one.
Yeah.
But that said, driving around on like a weekend afternoon and there's just no one is a unique way of viewing the city. Yeah. I can't say this is like an activity that I'm going to do a lot, but it was interesting to sort of make a little meandering drive going through the tunnel, going around the city, checking out sort of different neighborhoods, cruising along. It was a bit rewarding, and it also feels as if you're still self-isolated in your little cube. And I guess that's just why LA seems like a good place to live right now. And it's the only time I've felt envious of people who move to LA, where you have a patio or you have a backyard and you can grill and you have some outdoor space and it's sunny out, and then you get in your car and it's not the same as, living in New York where you're confined and you're around tons of people. That element of solitude that makes that element of solitude that makes LA deeply unpalatable to me right now is of course enticing.
Right. It's like, are you self-isolating and in quarantine, or do you just live in LA?
For 100%.
I mean, yeah, all the things that I thought I wasn't interested in, like watching shows that I don't necessarily care about, like not leaving my apartment or being enticed to leave my apartment, is like they are the fallback. They're enticing now, which is odd. It's like totally, moving the goalposts of the way you experience your day. And I was talking to one of my buddies. It's like the tension is our days are so painfully mundane around something that's so painfully abstractly terrifying. And this duality is just like exhausting, where he's like, my days are very slow and I can spice them up here and there, but like it takes time to rev your engine up to a routine. But that silence coupled with the blaring screaming of this pandemic is exhausting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't feel the same now as I did maybe even like a couple weeks ago, where because things have been so shut down, I just feel as if you're just not encountering that many people on the street. People having masks on is a bit reassuring, and that not that you are not going to get it from them, but like, excuse me, that they're not just kind of coughing into the air and it's flying everywhere. Still don't like it, but I feel like most people around you at this point do not have it, or most likely do not have it, because we've been socially isolated. It doesn't have quite the scariness that to me at least, that it did like a week ago. It's just a nice false sense of security that I've lulled myself into.
Right. I assume everyone is carrying it, but it's really complicated. I think they're figuring out slowly that there's like 8 different strains of this. And, I went out to buy groceries successfully, finally, last week or this weekend on Saturday. I just couldn't get out. I just didn't, because my grocery store closes early now at 6.
How many days did you spend inside total in a row?
5 in a row. I believe in it. I believe in that's what I want to do, and that's what
do whatever feels right.
Yes, exactly. Everyone should just do whatever feels right. But I went out there with, a mask, and there weren't people wearing masks, and I felt the usual the predictable wave of like, am I being rude? I don't want to, make my neighbor feel like I'm better or worse than them. Like, it's a weird conflicting wave of thought. And then I've just come to the point where I'm like, I'm doing this so someone doesn't have to wear the mask. Like, there was people shopping for groceries without masks, and I was wearing one so they can. So that just has to be the framing moving forward.
Yeah, I've decided that I probably already had it. That's my new school of thought.
Go off.
Well, it's not going to make me live any more recklessly. But I was, as you know, I got really sick at the end of January.
You were sick as a dog.
And that was before it was really here. And I kind of suspected that maybe I just had an early case of it when we didn't really know it had seeped upon American shores. And that made me overlook part of mid-March, in which I had a cough, and I had like shortness of breath and like a little bit of like a tight chest. And those are things that I never have. Like I never have shortness of breath or a tight chest. And I remember walking up a little bit of an incline and being like, whew. And I was like, wow, like I'm out of shape. I haven't been playing ball, and in my mind, I was still fixated on when I was like sick as shit. I was not thinking about that moment, but I had a dry cough. I did not have a fever. I had this shortness of breath. So here's what's persuaded me that I may have had it. At that point, we didn't really know that the whole like taste and smell thing was such a big deal and such a huge component of knowing whether you have it or not. So I'd read something about it, and I went to the fridge and I took out some like really spicy pickled lime or pickled mango or something, green mango. That shit is spicy as fuck, man. And I remember eating a couple forkfuls of it and being like, that's pretty spicy. Not that spicy as I remember. And thinking about that. So today, I went to the fridge ate a mouthful, and it like blew my mouth apart on fire. So I was like, wait, it is 100% true that I did not taste this spicy ass food 3 weeks ago the way I did today. Not at all. Like I ate a mouthful and it was like fire coming out of my ears. And 3 weeks ago, I just ate it and kind of was like, some mild tinkle. But it all could be psychosomatic too.
Man, definitely. But I remember talking to you through those dog days when you were sick, and when this corona thing dropped for real, it occurred to me that you may have had it, and luckily, hopefully, you have the antibodies to fight it, as everyone else has to go through it the first round. And do you think, like, so you're pinpointing that illness as maybe...
I think I was fixated on being really sick and ignored when I just had a bunch of symptoms but wasn't that sick. As I said, I walked up an incline and like lost my breath, and it kind of was strange. And then the whole thing with the taste buds. And that period of time, it kind of makes sense with it. But one of my friends called me or texted me like last week or 2 weeks ago and said, oh, I had corona. And I saw her on like March like 6th or 7th, just like at a gallery opening. And she came down with it. So I was like, if it was in that room, if she had it then, it would have shown up on me like 2 weeks later or a week and a half later.
It's hard to tell. Sometimes it never shows up, right? We went to our buddy's birthday party maybe a couple of days before this, like
the last party, as we've taken to calling it.
Yeah, the end of fun. A few days before Rudy Gobert, the Gobert bomb. But that room was full of people, and I remember that night, everyone trying to figure out what to do. Like, we were elbow high-fiving and stuff. But there was a couple people in there who said to me that they were overreacting, and it's okay to hug people because we're human beings and we cannot rob ourselves of a simple experience of being in the same room as each other. Looking back on it now, I'm like, oh, we all had the Rona, but I
remember that, degrees. Right? We were in this crowded bar doing like elbow taps.
Yeah.
And you're like, in retrospect, wow, we were children. We had no idea.
No idea the innocence of that.
Like there was 100 people in like a 12-foot square radius thing, and we're elbow bumping.
Shout out to our buddy Luch, who I wanted to hug, but he was like, elbows, baby. And I was like, this is frustrating.
But yeah, so I talked to one of my friends, and I was just, how you're just checking up on people. Like, how you doing? And I know this girl, and she said, oh, I had it. I had a mild case, and now I'm just I feel like a vampire. I've got a little crew of people who already had it, and we're like hanging out and doing mushrooms in Central Park and just kind of like rolling around the abandoned city. I'm like, that's kind of amazing.
I know. I mean, everyone's going to come out of this with like secrets, being like, I actually went out there, I didn't do this, or I was tripping the whole time. And I don't know how to cast any sort of judgment on whatever anyone wants to do. I mean, this is just science. And I think after a certain point when I was just looking at the gravity of how to contain this in New York City, I was like, if a few people need to do what they need to do, like bounce around or see their friends, like we just have to try to convince them not to, but also take the risk. And like, man, being a human on Earth is so complicated.
I've just decided that I'm not going to change the way I behave, but keeping in mind that I might have had it is a nice way not to freak out.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
because like I might be invulnerable. I might be a superhero right now. Who can say? But I'm not going to live recklessly. I'm still going to wash my hands. I'm not going to go commingle with people who have already had it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, because there's no test for it, which is really annoying. Because now we're starting to see the numbers of people that have recovered, and there's thousands of people now recovering because they were able to be tested. You can't check for the antibodies afterwards at this point. There's no test for that. So now we have people who did test positive and are getting over it, and they can go back to the workforce. They can help people. So it is very frustrating that I can't find out and take a test and say, oh, you did. You had it. You are likely in the clear going forward for a while. And now you can act normal. You can help people. You can do grocery deliveries. You can help old people. You can do things that gives you, like, as I said, a superpower over anyone else. But I can't test. I don't know.
I know, and I don't. In my head, I don't believe in this superpower just because there's so many different strains of it. So what I don't want to fearmonger or anything, but what I'm waiting for is like, can we get this again in a different way immediately, or in 2 weeks, or in a month, or in a year? Like, I don't know. Go scientists, man! Like, those are my homies right now. Like, I hope those nerds are like free to just work their asses off right now.
As far as that goes, the ability to reacquire corona, it seems like you would have a certain duration of immunity. But to your point, if it comes back in a different strain, or if it comes back seasonally, it might totally change. But people do believe that if you get it, you're not going to get it back at least right away.
Makes total sense. Definitely. A news story last night that really got me for a second was that tiger in the Bronx Zoo testing positive. It really shook me, man. If this thing is transmittable and can be carried by animals who maybe even migrate, not even a tiger who's in a cage, but like, if birds can get it now, this is a whole different game, right? Like, the rules we have a 5-point shot now. It's like, what? Okay, we're playing a whole different simulation or game, whatever.
What does it change, just for the sake of argument?
Because human behavior has less of an impact now. I think we've been told that this thing can be mitigated by the way humans behave and our social behavior and staying inside. If everyone just assumed that they had it, it would be gone soon, because we wouldn't push it. We wouldn't find a wrinkle to go out there and make ourselves happy, whatever. We'd be scared into behaving the right way to really extinguish this thing, sort of like South Korea. But if it's transmittable by birds and rats, or in New York City, like, yeah, let's say a rat can carry it, we're dealing with a different thing.
I mean, yeah, but to me, it also just comes down to, we're never really, really getting rid of this shit until there's a vaccine. So
yeah, I mean, that's
I think
true.
The biggest concern is that it gets carried by an animal, and then it mutates again, and then goes through another animal. It comes back to humans. Like, that to me is like, that's the scary vulnerability, is that it gets the same way this came from a bat and then may have gone through like a pangolin to a human, that animals keep adding wrinkles to the coronavirus, versus like, here comes a bird, it's a corona bird. Like,
no, that's not that hysteria, but
or I mean, I guess like going through livestock could be really rough.
Oh my God, let's say things that we consider to be food can carry it and transmit it, like, mad cow disease a few years ago. But every time it jumps from person to person,
that would probably be bad. It'd probably be bad if like every chicken had it.
It would create hysteria for sure, because chickens are weirder than bats to me. But and we eat them willy-nilly. So, but I think feedlots are very extreme. We've talked about this years ago on Cookies. Like, the feedlot system is vulnerable to something like this. Especially the answer to that, which is, free range, no antibiotics. Well, if there's I don't think this thing is vulnerable to antibiotics, but that whole system has weaknesses too. And I don't know, migratory animals scare me, because, like, birds move around the globe and just will really help whatever this virus wants to do.
Well, that's what the Spanish flu was caused by. It was migratory birds and pigs as livestock, and then going to humans. And I can't remember if it was in Texas or if it was somewhere in like the Southwest of America. Even though it's called the Spanish influenza, it was from here, and it was exactly that. It was migratory birds, and in this case, I believe geese. And then the illness of that and a pig with like the human flu, because all those vectors were in the same place. Like, there were soldiers, there were pigs, and there were birds. And that's kind of what all these things are. It's like a mix of different creatures kind of creating like SARS.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's my scientific understanding of it.
I kind of I kind of wanted to shout out bats a little bit. Those are some of the coolest animals on Earth.
And they're infested with coronaviruses, like tons of them. Seriously, just packed with corona.
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about the way we frame certain animals in our culture as like living at night. You know, they hang upside down. They're the color of their wings and their bodies. And they do carry this disease, and so do we. And we're probably better carriers than they are. But bats are just incredible animals. And shout out to all the Batmen out there in the NBA, and their Robins and their Alfreds. But
there was a New Yorker article about the coronavirus, and it talks a lot about the bats and that they've lived sort of peacefully with coronavirus in their system for centuries and thousands of years and eons, or however long you want to say.
That's encouraging.
And it's just been in their system and it doesn't hurt them.
Yeah.
But SARS-1 and SARS-2, more SARS, which is coronavirus, are both initially from bats.
Yeah.
The horseshoe bat, I believe they're called.
Oh, interesting. Remember Animaniacs, the fruit bats that were always getting drunk on rotten fruit, and they were somehow Jamaican?
Yeah, that was definitely coronavirus.
Do you remember those guys? They were such party animals, man. But back to your driving around, like New York City, we're seeing different experiences in different pockets of New York, right?
Yeah, the Times had a really interesting and not unsurprising map showing the areas that have been hardest hit by coronavirus. And in the most ferocious irony, of course, was that the number one hotspot for coronavirus on the planet right now is a neighborhood in Queens called Corona.
Wow.
Like that, it's like the virus knows. But seriously, that's crazy, right? The hardest hit place on the planet by coronavirus is Corona, Queens. Mm-hmm. But sadly, it also makes sense because it is a lower income area where people are congested, where more people in an apartment, and a lot of the workers are on the front lines of this. They are in construction, they are in food delivery, they are
food
supply, maybe working in hospitals. Like just in general, they are not a community that is able to successfully shelter in place without putting themselves in danger.
Mm-hmm. And did you see 60 Minutes last night?
I did not.
It was the one that Trump was so scared of that he had to schedule an immediate press briefing to take eyes off of it. But it was a heartbreaker, man. It was about the community in America that cannot afford to lose this much money. And it was like watching really hardworking people with jobs being like, I'm good for 2 months and then I might be homeless with my kid. I'm like, what is happening to America, man? It had someone, I forgot the name of the restaurant, up in Harlem, and she had, she was a self-made success story, and she ran this restaurant for 15, 18 years, I forget. And she was just like, I just laid off my entire staff, and there's like a skeleton crew here just supplying people with takeout. I don't know what's happening. And you see these areas in New York through that heat map of kind of a concentration of family-owned businesses. And maybe, like living situations, for example, Chinatown, like a lot of people live in one apartment, and there's situations in there where it's like a 3-bedroom apartment and 4 to 5 people live in it. And you see the socioeconomic impact of something like a pandemic can have, and how a lot of the smaller, the colder parts of this map are places in Midtown and maybe even the Lower East Side, the East Village, the West Village, where people just skedaddle to their like cabins or can lock themselves down with a doorman accepting food. You know, like it's just kind of the cruelest situation.
Remember when this first started arriving and people said, you know, look, Corona doesn't know race or class or rich
Sure
or
does.
poor. Just kidding. It totally does. Yeah. That's why it's making a freaking beeline for Corona Queens and leaving the West Village completely unscathed. We're all in this together. Guess what? We're not. We're totally not. And, you know, in Greenpoint, because it's older Polish people, you know, who are able to stay inside, you have wealthier younger people who, to your point, either leave and go home to be with their families, go upstate to their place in the Catskills, or have the financial means to stay inside and stay out of trouble. And it, like walking around Greenpoint, people on the street don't have it. Everyone's wearing masks and being very diligent and following orders for the most part, but no one has it here. There was like there was like 100 some cases. But you go over to Williamsburg or other areas of Brooklyn and it's all over the place because the financial means, and not only to withstand it by sheltering in place, but also just to flee, are totally different.
I mean, people with cars who can leave, you know, in like 20 minutes, you're out of Manhattan, where it's harder for some other people who... How are we going to use the subway system ever again? How is this going to look?
But driving around, you know, when I was going through neighborhoods in Brooklyn, there's a lot of people on like Fulton Street. And people are wearing masks and doing their best, but there's a lot of people out. There's that video of a bunch of teenagers in a fight with cops. There was like 30 kids. None of them are wearing things over their face. They're all like, you know, shoving and yelling. They're acting normal. Yeah. And again, I do not want to be like, this is about individual responsibility, because I don't think that it is. That's not the real story here. But it is a lot harder to keep this virus from transmitting in neighborhoods that are not, or neighborhoods that do not have good options for staying away from it.
Yeah. And you said something about how this virus maybe has a personality, and or you know, talks about income or race or all these heavy ideas that are like whatever, social constructs or not social constructs. And I always kind of bristle when people try to give personalities to things that don't have personalities. I mean, like, cancer's awful, but when people say like, fuck cancer, I'm going to beat it, I'm like, that's not right. Whatever helps you get through this, I am down for you, man. But it doesn't have a personality. It's not like, ooh, I'm fighting this human. It just like is a thing. And this virus is a thing, but what it exposes is we have been so deeply, deeply broken that something like this that is egalitarian, which affects everyone the same way, affects a certain sector more, just because we're a little broken. And
a little.
Well, a lot broken.
We're deeply, perhaps like forever broken in America.
A zillion times over, I want to say it every episode, the issue we have in our generation is the wealth gap. And that is the thing we have to address even more than the environment and more than this coronavirus. But, you know, the wealth gap has existed. I mean, you watch Lord of the Rings, even Game of Thrones. The wealth gap is the way society kind of builds itself, and it's cruel, and it doesn't feel right. And there's joy to be had everywhere, I think, upstairs, downstairs, right? That was so great about like Downton Abbey. The joy of that show is like there's intricacies in your life no matter where you are, and some of those stories overlap. But watching the heat map was deeply like sad. It's just watching this play out where it's just like death. It's just like, it's so awful.
Yeah, and you see these pieces of news about how they're going to start using parks in New York as temporary places to bury bodies. You're just like, this is science fiction.
This is War of the Worlds.
But, looking at that map, you also saw other sort of societal indicators, like in neighborhoods where there were a lot of Hasidic residents, there were a lot of cases. And I have not read anything about those particular communities, but they're really tight-knit. They have tons of kids. And it was apparent when you looked at, here is Borough Park, here is Williamsburg, here's where Crown Heights is. Those areas had a lot. And it was interesting to sort of think about, to your point, how this virus that does not differentiate does spread according to social indicators, whether it's economic or the way that people live in their own, tight-knit communities, etc. And it really does create this map that makes so much sense when you look at it in a way that should be, if everything was equal, totally random.
I know, and it makes me think...
or consistent.
Right. It makes me think of Italy. It's like, why did the numbers spike in Italy? It's like, oh, behavior. But also, let's not forget, they really value their elderly, and they cherish and prize their like grandmothers and great grandmothers, and those are the people who are most affected. And in these poor neighborhoods, you have a lot of immigrants, whether they be from Italy or Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, or all these places, and they value the family structure in a different way. That you see a lot of mixing of very young people with very elderly people in these communities, and they are vulnerable to this specific thing. And that is something that is like, it's a heartbreaker, man. It's like through that kind of wonderful behavior of this family that, and this, as you said, this density, that they are susceptible to this one thing.
Yeah, I mean, none of this is surprising at all. It's almost surprising how unsurprising it is, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
I've had the awful take where I'm like, I'm stewing in awful takes here late at night, staring at Randall's. But I am grateful to this specific virus in that it is predictable so far. We can see how it behaves. It's showing itself to us. Look at me giving it a personality. But it's behaving in a way that we can talk about. And at least, like, I don't want to panic, but like, imagine if it was totally harmless, but it made our eyes bloodshot. It's like, it's okay. Your capillaries just burst in your eyes. So you're going to have like dark red eyes if you have it. That would create panic in the streets, I think. And this virus, they keep on saying, like, your boy, the president, keeps on saying, like, it's the invisible enemy. And I'm like, I'm grateful for that, because I don't think our society can handle anything more.
Well, I think if it had a telling side effect that you immediately like had bloodshot eyes, you would have a more visible indicator and a stigma that would probably be beneficial to people wandering around, not knowing they have it and shedding it left and right.
Yeah, it would be the test that we're desperately in need of. But also, I think there would be a little bit of panic because we're such visual people. Eye test, shout out to the NBA. But why aren't there like trucks of like people getting tested on like every fifth block?
I don't know, man.
Why is this not happening?
No idea. It's surreal.
Why doesn't every Dwayne Reed and CVS have a line for people to get tested? And we should be able to sign up and show up, get our tests done, and have the results in a day. Like, over and over, and have as many times as you want. And required want. Like, we need to do
I'm
this.
with you. It's the same complaint I was just grousing about, where I said there was no test for me to find out if I already had it.
Yeah.
So I have to, keep operating as if I have never had it and live in fear of getting it. There's no other way around it.
Thinking that you do have it is what they're saying, which makes more sense, right? It's like behave like you have it, and then
exactly.
But it's like Groundhog Day. Every day I wake up and I rub my eyes and look at my phone, and it's like masks and tests on the way. I'm like, yo, every day for the last 2.5 weeks, where are these tests and where are these masks, man?
Well, another story. There was an article in Bloomberg that went mildly viral, but it was about what will happen in New York City post-corona. And I did not find it particularly convincing, but their argument here was that after corona, people will not want to live in New York, and people will flee New York because they'll fear another outbreak or us being a center or a target of these similar kinds of viruses going forward. And that it will lower rents and create a artistic mecca, sort of create Berlin post-World War II, where young people will live and it will not be an economic center anymore, but it will be a place for artists. And I read that and what do you think about that premise?
Let 1,000 Kurt Cobains bloom. That's a dirty trick by Bloomberg. It's just rich people are trying to frame this, and there's them swooping in and like creating all that luxury stuff that they've been waiting to do. Being like, the bohemian outskirts of Ocean Hill. Finally, songwriters, art. Flowers are blooming. It's like, no, they're just gonna like renovate and flip. I immediately thought of the beach when the Hurricane Sandy hit, and it was demolished, Rockaway, and it didn't turn into a creative bohemia with affordable rent. People with money swooped in and staked claim to real estate there, and it's now developed even nicer than it was. And you have to redevelop. This is so odd. This kind of, Danny Meyer said this on 60 Minutes last night. This is like the worst tsunami with no wind and no damage. There's like nothing to rebuild except like our structure of living.
This just seems to me like a take that is counter to what we've learned, that whenever something
Yes.
bad happens, it just gets worse from there.
Yeah.
The pandemic hit and then New York became cool again. Mm-hmm. Or how about this? It became deeply less cool. New York sucked even more. All the restaurants and bars and places we like to hang out closed, and were replaced by generic, multinational corporations. And younger people who used to come to New York decided that like they might as well just stay at home because now they can work their job from their parents' house. And all of a sudden it was just people who had a ton of money and second houses to escape to who started like really liking New York City and living here.
What we really need is a John Varvatos in the Oculus, man. That would really help our culture as New York City. It's like, there's an Apple store in the Oculus? Perfect.
A Varvatos in every former punk rock club.
Let 1,000 Varvatoses bloom. Right. It's like, we know how this behaves. And even if the people with the power have their best intentions in mind, like, this doesn't create opportunity for the lower class. It creates an opportunity for the upper class.
I do think that for a while at least, the Airbnb industry's collapse will lower apartment prices. That to me is my opinion on how things will change. I don't view it as
that had already changed before the virus, though. Airbnb policy in New York City had changed. So
yeah, but people were still doing it.
Yeah, but it wasn't offered.
I know, but it's Airbnb's interest to like camouflage it.
You hate Airbnb.
Of course I do. They're
But
awful.
you use Airbnb.
Yeah. But you live in a society, just even though you don't like it. You have a cell phone. You order something on Amazon occasionally, but you don't like it. Dude, that's how it works.
But don't you say in hotel? I mean, we don't have to relitigate this, but I love Airbnb as an idea, but it had an adverse effect that I think it's tough because I think policy changes these ideas, but also I like the idea that if you want to be an Uber driver, you can be an Uber driver. You remember they were trying to cap the number of Ubers in Manhattan? And I'm like, well, what about that one guy who's not allowed to, who would really need that job?
Yeah, I'm not buying that.
So you think you love caps. You love capping things.
Uber is a vile company. They are vile. To be like, yeah, but if someone is so poor and so broke that they want to be an Uber driver, I'm like, okay, that's true. I don't want anyone not to have a job. That doesn't mean I have to support Uber.
Let's take Uber out of the equation because they're run poorly by people we don't root for. But let's take the idea of an industry that blows up, and like the internet car thing. I don't know what you call that. And the state or the city unsuccessfully trying to cap the number of cars on the street seems like un-American to me. Or it seems un-American to try to cap that opportunity for people to do a new thing.
But we did that for years. We've done that in New York City for ages with the taxi cab industry. You had to have a license to be a livery driver. You had to have a medallion to be a yellow driver. Like, this is not like a new anti-American principle. That's what existed prior to, car service apps forever.
Yes, and I think we should change it. Like, we should change the NCAA. I don't like salary caps for players. I think that is deeply disturbing to me. In the same way as salary caps for billionaires or car drivers. I think the answer lies somewhere else. But if someone like LeBron James wants to earn $1 billion, let him earn $1 billion.
Yeah, I disagree. But my thing is, if we're talking about cars and saying, well, anyone who has a car should be allowed to be a taxi driver, but that's like different from we have done forever. That's different from what every other country does. But then we're saying all you need to be a taxi driver is just a car. Why not? Well, let's make that the rule. But that's not how we do it. You have to protect the taxi driver as a profession by saying that not everyone who just has a car can be a cab driver. I mean, that's the whole argument.
I mean, that's valid. That's the NCAA's argument, right?
That's not the same thing at all.
But their argument is this is what we've done, and these universities need this revenue because they've based their entire program and scholarship programs off of March Madness. And if we change it right away, it's going to change the face of it. We've been doing this forever.
I am not going to entertain that the NCAA is cab drivers. Because
the system. Just talk about the system, because you're talking about the players versus the NBA and cab drivers versus the system.
I'm saying that cab drivers have traditionally been licensed as operators by the Taxi and Limousine Commission. And that's how they were protected, and that's why they were able to charge certain amounts, and that was how it was a livable profession for many first-generation immigrants. And to say, well, I think anyone who owns a car can just pick up fares and drive around, well, then that's saying we should not have a profession of taxi drivers. We should not have that as something that you can say, this is going to be my livelihood. I'm going to be a professional taxi driver. It's cool, anyone who just feels like making some bucks can do that as a job. It's like saying, okay, well, anyone who wants to do any job at any point can do it. And that's what democracy is. And I'm like, okay, I get that. But we do have qualifications for jobs, right? Anyone can just be a surgeon if they want to. If they get a knife, they can do surgery. That's not how we do things.
It's like having a record shop and being like, even though these are tradable through email and MP3s, I still need to sustain, right? I think there has to be systems in which we protect the medallion community, the taxi driver medallion community, because they've bought into security. So you have to supply them with a level of security. But if the universe shifts and all of a sudden you have an iPod and the record stores struggle with this, and this is a whole Generation X kind of, it's how come this experience is gone? How come it's not protected? It's well, let's try to protect it. Record store day, and that's it, kind of. And vinyl, whatever. But it changed on us so fast that it gave me whiplash.
But the taxi cab industry didn't change. It does the same thing. It was just a technology that was added from someone who was an outsider. If you go to Germany and you go to Berlin, you use an app that's exactly like Uber, but it calls a yellow cab.
You can do that in New York too.
That's exactly what you do in Berlin. You want a cab, you get your app, and it's called My Taxi, and you put in your address using GPS, and then a cab comes and picks you up. It takes you to the address that you have popped into the phone. When you get there, you either pay them cash or you pay them via credit card over the app. It's just like Uber or Lyft or Juno, rest in peace.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that there was a new idea that came in. It was just technology.
Yeah, and tech is huge because the songs are the songs. The delivery is different. The usability has changed. The audience has changed.
I mean, the biggest problem was that New York's taxi cabs didn't immediately figure out the way to have their own technology and to say, use this. And Uber is operating at a deficit. I mean, Uber is the best example of how destructive middlemen are. They operated they lost money rampantly in order to try to corner the market, which destroyed medallion holders, which caused, lifelong cabbies to blow their brains out in front of City Hall.
I think Uber as a company is a discussion, and quickly they're not run well. They're kind of predatory. We don't love Uber. The service and technology they invented changed civilization. Like, it changed Western civilization, and cities changed because of Ubers. The way we interacted changed, and I thought it was not only interesting but kind of like good. Like, I love this idea that if we have access to this service, that we would use it because it was a better solution.
But their impact has been absolutely awful. It's just like all these technologies where we exchange humanity for convenience, and we're like, yeah, but it's cool because I can be up in my apartment and say, okay, I want this to pick me up at this time. It'll be a nice car. Here's the address, and I don't have to worry about it. It goes to my credit card. Convenient as shit. You don't have to walk up to a street. You don't have to hail a cab. You don't have to use cash. You don't have to know exactly where you're going. You could be in a foreign city. You could be in Mexico City. Works just the same. Incredibly convenient. But the cost is, because they have all the data, is that there are Ubers all over New York, idling, driving around, congesting all the traffic with Ubers just because they need a certain amount of cars so that you don't wait that long. But they can't have too many cars, because then they'll have drivers who aren't earning any money. So it's like all this permutation, which means that you have to have a lot of empty cars basically at various points in order to get to you within like 7 minutes.
Yeah, until it loses them money and they change the policy. And, Uber was sweet for the workforce for like unsustainably like a quarter, 4 months, 5 months, a year maybe. People were making good money, and then they realized it wasn't necessarily cost effective.
I mean, Uber's impact on society, and in New York, specifically a city like New York that doesn't have like a drunk driving problem because people don't drive. Mm-hmm. Its impact on New York is just abysmal. Same with Airbnb. New York's mix of population density and income and being a media center, etc. Like, we get absolutely ravaged by Airbnb and Uber. Like, Uber's impact on New York is straight garbage, just trash. The only thing is, it's convenient, as you said.
Yeah, I think it's, this is where legislation kicks in. And I think our experience with Uber, we like it. I don't use Uber that much, but I do enjoy the option. But I think the legislation has to acknowledge what's happening on the ground, and this is their job, right? And, all last week I was going through all these ways to try to see what the government was doing to help me pay my rent. And I have a studio. I have a landlord in my studio, and these few months are really tough because I can't get there. No one's making any money, and
could you bike there?
It's a bit far, but I could. I don't love riding bikes because it's dangerous, but now is the time, right? Now is definitely, absolutely the time. I was thinking about, after this, hopefully this is all done, I would turn into a biker instead of a subway person. I'm a subway guy, but and bus guy, weirdly. But I got a long email, a written email by my landlord last night, and he was just like, here's the lay of the land. Here's what legislation is offering me. Here is where my financial situation. Let me be honest with you. He's like, I need money from somewhere because I have to pay. They did not suspend mortgage. And he was just like, they talk about it, but it hasn't happened. He's like, I have to pay insurance. I have to pay utilities. I have to pay to operate this thing. And he was nice. He was just like, if you can't pay me, don't pay me, and we'll figure out eventually when you can. We'll cross that bridge. But he's like, reach out to me. If you can't do this, I need to have a conversation with you, but you owe me rent. And I thought that was kind of like depressing to see like him express that kind of despair, where he was like, if you don't pay rent, no one will have a studio because I don't know how to keep this thing open.
But haven't mortgages been suspended?
Not yet. There's no foreclosures for 3 months, but the language is weird. So I've been applying to all these grants, like these artist grants and all the things they've been talking about on TV. They keep on changing it on the fly. Like, I believe overnight, right before this dropped on Friday, businesses it went from 65 to 75% you had to use for your employees, but that hurts people who are already out of business, who have no employees,
right?
And the legislation is kind of letting me down. And this is another bad take I've had recently, which is awful. I'm so rooting for the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the White House. I forgive them on a minute-to-minute basis if they just do something good. Like, no more gotcha stuff, no more hypocrisy thought. I mean, this is like really an emergency. I just want these 3 pillars of our government to help us. And I don't care who said this and who, put all that stuff aside. They need to come through for us. And so far, not so great.
Well, you are an optimistic man.
Have to be, right? There's there's a choice, but I have to be.
I mean, I'm not necessarily a doomer, and I hope that the government does the right thing to help the people, but I'm certainly not forgiving anything. I'm not temporarily forgiving anything. I'm not doing any of that shit. I am hoping that they do things the right way. Am I optimistic about that? Of course not, because they are venal charlatans, and there's no adult in the room who cares about people. There's nothing. And again, I hope for the best, but I'm certainly not in the business of saying I'm rooting for the Trump White House. Like, nah.
Oh, I'm rooting for them, man. We need them. Maybe I'm putting aside I'm suspending my Schadenfreude.
I don't feel, that's not my emotion, that I'm like, oh, they didn't care about this and now they are
like,
looking
look at
like
these mistakes that they made. Yeah.
No, their mistakes should be pointed out repeatedly, should be documented, and should be held against them.
Yes, I believe in media. I believe in reporters. I'm rooting for them.
I'm not like cackling with glee at them being inept at this, because we knew they'd be inept at this because they're inept at everything. The only thing they're good at is scamming, and they aren't capable or competent or even willing to be good leaders. So yes, I'm rooting for them in a sense of I hope that they do things that benefit American people, but I am in no way thankful, and I am in no way absolving them of being absolutely horrific, just like the worst possible people in office at the worst possible time. Like, they're not being forgiven.
Well, I didn't say anything about forgiveness, but I want to suspend that for a second. And I read I believe it was the New York Times, where it painted the picture of them as like our problem maybe if you are like a gotcha or chasing hypocrisy is the premise of them as a government or as a White House. They are not a White House. They are people who are standing there, but they don't present that part of our government because they have no experience. Analogies are annoying here, but let's say you have a chef in a kitchen and he's trained and he can dish out amazing Chinese food, and then you replace him with somebody who puts on an apron has a wok. Everything's going. The mise en place is done, but he's never cooked. It's like, well, the chef is standing right there. It's like, it's a chef visually, but it's not the chef. It's like, why can't he make these dishes? He has his apron on. Everything's firing. We have orders in. Let's go. It's like, he's not a chef. And this is how I view the White House. I think there's a false premise that they can even handle this. And this is like not earth-shattering stuff, but to ask Jared Kushner to do anything is asking too much. He doesn't know what he's doing. So,
but they don't have to have Jared Kushner up there. There's no reason for Jared Kushner to be up there even talking to us. There's no reason he even has a position in the White House. So, like, I'm not absolving them of saying, like, yeah, but what do you expect from Jared fucking Kushner? I don't expect anything from him, but he shouldn't even be there. It's not like, well, they're just trying their best. No, they trotted up Jared Kushner like a lifelong cretin and like slumlord up to say he's going to spearhead this effort. They could have hired someone real. They could have gotten anybody. They got Donald Trump's moron son-in-law. They could have gotten doctors. They could have gotten medical professionals. They didn't. So I can't just say, well, you know, they're just not cut out for this. No, they are intentionally and foolishly picking the worst possible people at the worst possible time.
And this is exactly my point. He shouldn't be in the kitchen. And the whole premise of what they're doing is play acting. So,
of course, but they don't have to.
No one has to do anything, but they do because we know why, money. But like, and that would be naive not to think that there's no benefit from doing this monetarily. But what I mean is, I need them to do something good.
Well, they won't.
But this is like a conversation that like is really tough to have because the emotions boil over and it's almost giving like coronavirus a personality, that idea, you know, and I feel like it is really tough. It's a tough mind space to inhabit where like, I'm just hoping these pillars of our government can come through for us on a small way. And it's a tough mental space to inhabit, but I find that being cooped up in my house, not leaving for 5 days, being angry is like so bad. Like we have to kind of like do that Bart Simpson, Tom Sawyer thing and step out of our bodies and be like, what's fucking actually happening here? And like without my obviously biases and just like trying to extrapolate what is going on Earth and with our government. I don't know. It's just like a mind exercise that I think is helpful looking at this because, of course, like I just don't want this guy as our president desperately. Desperately, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're shooting for, sort of a cloud of hazy optimism.
Or reality.
Well, I don't think you're talking about reality.
Well, I am in a way that I know how bad these guys are. Let's move on. I can't dwell on them any longer. Like,
I'm not specifically dwelling on them either. I'm not sitting here. I don't watch any of Trump's little press conference rallies. I don't watch Jared Kushner talk. I don't watch any of those. No, none of them.
Fauci's interesting, if not for the jokes.
But I'm saying I haven't listened to one of them. I've not seen one of Trump's daily.
That's okay. It's not for everybody.
Missives. No, I don't watch any of those. I
mean, right. This is like not for the faint of heart, man. Like, it's awful. Like watching these things and not blowing up with like garbage pail kid, atomic bomb scenarios is really tough. I don't know. Do you watch Cuomo every day?
No, I don't watch any of these guys. Like, I don't get reassured by them. I don't get angry by them. I'm not involved in that.
I want to see how policy is made, though. Are you curious to see like how these politicians think?
No, Cuomo absolutely sucks. He's terrible.
That's fine. You can still watch him. Like I watched the Knicks.
That's true. No, I have no interest in watching these guys talk to me. I do not care.
I mean, everyone's got to do their thing.
I can read about the way that things get sorted out or what's happening. I do not need to hear Cuomo say reassuring things and with ASMR governance, or Trump talk about like models and this is the kind of model that he actually likes. I don't need that.
I just ignore that stuff. But
I mean, I don't
we're not
watch the
kink
news.
shaming here, even with the Cuomo's nipple ring. We're not trying to kink shame anybody. This is purely politics.
Anyway, good luck with all that. You sound a lot like a Chicago Bulls fan.
Good,
Someone just
good jerseys.
someone just hoping for the best.
Good jerseys. Good draft picks.
Can you explain what's happening in Chicago now that they are looking for a real leader? They want someone to make some decisions, someone to do good for the organization. And it looks like it's not going to be Gar-Pax who are getting the Steve Mills treatment and being shifted to different wings of the building.
Special
basements with low ceilings.
The special advisor, a new entertainment wing, a new management wing of that organization. Have they been there for like 17 or 18 years?
I feel like other than maybe the Spurs, they're the longest tenured front office in the league.
And they've had as much success as the Spurs, so they definitely deserve
Spurs
that.
East.
Yeah, exactly. Woo! What a team, man. I mean, the Jordan years we'll always remember. I can't. And now I'm ready for this ESPN documentary, but they have not been successul that after that era at all. They had an MVP, Derrick Rose. They had a flurry of mid lottery picks in the draft, to little but some success, I would say. They have a core currently in 2020. They have a core of some really nice young players, and when you see them all together, it's weird, man. It's not something you really want to get into.
The Bulls are a weird team to me because when I look at their roster, my take isn't the same as yours. I look at the roster and I'm like, I kind of like half of these guys.
Okay, go. Let's do this. Let's litigate the Bulls.
Well, so under Thibodeau. When you had Derrick Rose and then you had Jimmy Butler, those teams were not great, but they were perennial playoff teams.
Eastern Conference Finals.
They went first round under Vinny Del Negro. Then they got Derrick Rose. They went to the Eastern Conference Finals and lost to LeBron. And then it was like first round semis. And then the last 3 years have been sad. They have missed the playoffs the two prior to this season and would certainly miss it this year as well. So, they were 22-43. Their offense was third or fourth worst in the league. Their defense was mediocre. They had Jim Boylan, a pop disciple who was deeply unpopular among players on the team and kind of came off as a unhumorous disciplinarian who just kind of sucked. There's nothing to like about their trajectory, but when I look at the roster, I like half their dudes, and there were guys that I kind of hoped that the Sixers would pluck away at the deadline. You've got the god Luke Cornett, Chris Dunn, and Shaquille Harrison are two of the better perimeter defending guards in the league. Neither one of them is a great shooter or a great offensive player, but they are really, really good perimeter defenders, like exceptionally good.
Chris Dunn is a defensive god and an offensive juke.
Like no one really knows who Shaquille Harrison is, but he's an awesome perimeter defender. He's a beast. And I like Levine. You've got Otto Porter. You've got Thaddeus Young, who's kind of like Zion without ups. I don't know.
Checks out.
I like Tomas
Satoransky.
I kind of like the whole roster in a way that there's no star, there's no great player. But if you told me that team was a 500 team or was a 7th seed, I would also believe you.
I wouldn't. Only because of the depreciation of Otto Porter Jr. They spent a lot of money on him. He made $27 million this year, so he takes up some of that cap, and he hasn't been able to stay healthy. I like him enough as a player. I thought he was overpriced, but going into the season with like a big two of Otto Porter Jr. and Zach LaVine is kind of nice, but like I hate to do this thing that the BMM does, but like on a good team, would any of these players start?
Levine definitely, but
Levine's pretty good.
Levine's good. He's a very good offensive player.
Yep.
He actually changed his shot selection, and his efficiency really shifted. He's now an efficient scorer. He turns the ball over too much. He can pass a bit.
Not a prom king. On the surface, perhaps, but I think he's not officially a prom king.
I think he's good, and I was a consistent critic of Levine when he was on the Timberwolves. When he first went to the Bulls, I kind of roasted him, but the guy's a good offensive player. He's pretty efficient, above average, and sometimes well above average. He can shoot threes. He gets to the foul line a decent amount. I like Levine. I think he's a good player.
So they created this team in a traditional way. I think they look for value in the draft, and they looked for a few stars, and they signed Otto Porter Jr. and got Zach LaVine, and Sadorensky's a really nice point guard. I like him quite a bit, but in their draft, on their roster currently, they have Chris Dunn. Oh, they traded for him. Kobe White, Lauri Markkanen, and Wendell Carter. And I think you would think those three would be like usher in the next generation of Bulls' reasonable success. And Kobe White's nice, but those players aren't necessarily who we thought they were coming out of the draft. I kind of liked Lauri coming out of the draft, but he's even recently suggested that he wants to move on after all this drama. And those three rookies aren't necessarily hits. They're better than what the Knicks got, but they are not stars.
And this goes to a frequent topic of conversation in that you can get lottery picks, but there's a real difference between picking at 5, 6, 7, 8 and picking at 1 or 2.
Oh my God, huge.
And the Bulls were corralled into that second-ish tier of the lottery where you can absolutely get a star. You can absolutely find a superstar, but you don't have a chance at getting one year in, year out. You don't have that guy that's John Morant. You're like, okay, well, maybe it's Kobe White. And they pick 7 for Kobe White. They pick 7th for Markkanen. They pick 7th for Wendell Carter. All those guys were the 7th pick. And it's just outside of that tier of can't miss talent. So, like, you can get lucky and you can find yourself like a Paul George or Kawhi anywhere in the lottery. But it's hard.
It's really hard.
And this is the kind of player that you normally get. A guy who's sort of promising, could be a starter somewhere, but you're not sure. And by the time you know, they suddenly cost money.
Guess what chances they have at the lottery? What rank chance they have at the lottery this year?
22 wins? Is it 7?
It is 7. 7-4. 4 more sevens. But you're absolutely right. And I think there's bad luck there because in those specific drafts, the 7 pick was not that good. There's some drafts where they are, but the probability of that is low because having 7 really impactful players is a tough call, a tough sell. But I think
the Markkanen draft is a good example because it was Fultz, Lonzo, Tatum, Josh Jackson, Fox, Isaac, and then Markkanen. And the guys who went ahead of him were generally all predicted to go ahead of him. Mm-hmm. Those picks made sense, and they didn't all work out. So you see how there are no like sure bets. Fultz didn't work out. Josh Jackson didn't work out at all.
Yeah.
And by the time you get to 7th, then you look at the guys beneath him: Frankie Smokes, Dennis Smith Jr., Zach Collins, Malik Monk, Luke Kennard. And then you've got like Donovan Mitchell and Bam, but they weren't projected to go in the top 7.
They were picked at the right spot for sure.
So I guess my point here is that there are always going to be mistakes at every point of the draft, whether it's 1st or 7th, but your options start really diminishing. And you end up with Lauri Markkanen, which is not a bad pick. He just is not a pillar for a franchise.
And Kobe White has really come on this season. And Wendell Carter is a nice, boring, a one-and-done bus factory product. But they have to keep on going until they identify a star. And it's tough because they find themselves in purgatory. And I think because of bad luck, because of lottery balls, and because of what the draft looks like when those lottery balls hit 7. If they had
And it can
4,
go the other direction, right?
Yeah.
Because if you get Paul George and you just hit that on that guy,
yeah,
and he was at 7 or 8 or wherever, you're like, okay, now it all makes sense. Okay, we have our star, and we have Levine, and we've got Otto Porter, who's pretty good, and we've got Carter, and things start working out. But if you just get that typical, average 7th pick, you're kind of just going back to the drawing board. And then you're like, all right,
yeah.
let's sign Thaddeus Young. He's a solid pro. Let's pick up a couple other pieces and let's try to win some games, I guess.
Yeah, they're doing the Knicks thing where they're no, they're not. But the Bulls are my bad. They don't have white face makeup on. They're not staring at Randall's. What am I talking about? They don't have like a fretless bass. But I think, shout out to Primus. I think they're doing their strategy is so boring and reasonably acceptable. Like identifying veterans that are kind of good and playing the lottery balls and the draft is a way to get good. They're just not doing it in a good way. I like Zach LaVine, but he's not extraordinary. I liked Otto Porter-ish. I wouldn't touch him in free agency. And then they signed Thaddeus Young to $13 million, $13 million, $14 million. Like, I don't know. Maybe he belongs in New Orleans. That's a taste of Louisiana. Shout out to Louisiana. But they're doing a very simple thing poorly.
In my opinion, that's a team that should have been looking to unload some useful parts at the deadline and did not do that. I think that was a team that should have been really hunting and trying to pick up some future draft assets in exchange for guys that you just mentioned, like Satoransky or Dunn. Because are you going to pay Dunn? Like,
No,
is he the future of your position? Maybe he is. When I mentioned Dunn as a potential target for the Sixers, Bulls fans were like, oh, no, we're not trading Dunn. Well, then you're going to have to pay him.
Yeah.
I don't really know what the plan is. Do they like these pieces? Or could they have unloaded Markkanen, and could they have unloaded Dunn, and could they have unloaded Cornette and said, okay, we're just going to get a bunch of picks, and we're going to have Levine, and we're just going to kind of like reset this whole thing with our young guys, Levine and picks. But again, that's why they need a new GM.
Yeah, and I feel like the management in the Bulls, I agree with their strategy. I would have done that too. But the Bulls strategy might say, well, let's say we do get a pick for Markkanen. Is it going to be better than Markkanen? Let's say we do get a pick for Cornette. I thought you guys love Cornette. Is that pick going to be better than Luke Cornette? I'm like, that's a good question. He's on the books for 2.25. Like, it's just bad luck, man. And I just think it's bad luck. It's lottery balls.
Yeah, I don't have a great solution for the Bulls. I don't know if they should be in full teardown mode where you try to trade off Levine and get like 2 first-rounders. Maybe that's their best bet. Maybe you have to look at it and say, what's your one untouchable piece? Okay, he's the one that's got to get traded.
Right, he gets touched. Right. I think Levine and Satoransky are the 2 players to deal, and you hold Kobe White. And Markkanen seems unhappy, so you get rid of him. Wendell Carter, you keep. That's not an exciting core, man. Picks with Kobe White and Wendell Carter is not that fun.
No, they're a bit like the Knicks in terms of the kind of talent they've gotten from the draft because they've picked in more or less the same places. That's where you get a Kevin Knox or a Frankie Smokes. Those are the guys you get. And they're all right, but they're also young, and it takes a couple years until you know if they're worth building around, and you don't really want to trade them before that. And then now Kevin Knox and Wendell Carter are 2 years into their career.
Exactly.
And you're like, okay, we got to decide, are we going to extend this guy in a year and a half? What are we doing?
And I always wonder what the market is. Like, let's say behind closed doors, they did offer Satoransky or Levine. In my mind, those are players that teams would definitely want, but maybe they had tepid interest, sort of like there was leak like New York is gonna deal Dennis Smith Jr. I'm like, oh really? He's available now? So cool. Like, you know, the phone's ringing. But I don't know what the market for some of these guys are. I feel like some teams would just wait for them to expire on their contracts and like scoop them up when they feel like it.
That to me seems like what'll happen.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of trades and being an opportunity to speak about the god, Allen Iverson,
Woo!
there was a little more clarification of a long rumored trade, which was that Larry Hughes and a draft pick were set to be sent to Toronto in exchange for Tracy McGrady, which would have paired then, I believe, 24-year-old Allen Iverson with Tracy McGrady, who then emerged into being arguably the best player in the NBA for a couple of years,
Insane.
on the same team in Philadelphia. And according to Myth, the deal was in place, and then it was reported by Stephen A. Smith, who had caught wind of it through being a Philadelphia journalist, which caused the Raptors to get cold feet and then back out of the trade. What do you think about this deal? Do you think that was actually that close to happening?
I have an inside guy who immediately hit me up and he's like, I'm asking T-Mac right now. And yeah, it was about to happen. T-Mac confirmed that this was certainly on the table and certainly a thing that he saw happening at the time. And it fell through because of Stephen A. Smith doing an amazing job like he always does. But it's such a fine line in the NBA, right? Like, because if that happens, we're looking at like the golden age of Philly basketball, kind of. And that era is golden enough. But the fact that we know it was so close to happening is really frustrating, man.
It just adds to another frustrating legend, which was the draft in which the Sixers picked Larry Hughes, because apparently Larry Brown had made a promise to his family or to him that they would take him if he was available, leading them to not take Paul Pierce or Dirk Nowitzki. And I know Billy King later said that he wanted Dirk Nowitzki. At the time, I remember watching the draft live and being like, why aren't they taking Paul Pierce? He had just kept dropping. And I thought Larry Hughes was a cool player. I liked him. He had an and one tattoo. Him and Iverson were the Flight brothers.
I love Larry Hughes.
He was really cool
Yeah.
in college. I think he played for St. Louis, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, he was a cool player, and I liked him. But at the time of the draft, people wondered why they passed on Paul Pierce, and then later Billy King said, I was the Dirk guy, whether it's true or not.
Right.
But the T-Mac thing is yet another frustrating part of the storyline of Allen Iverson never getting that second star. And the same way, they got the number 2 pick in the draft with Tim Duncan and ended up trading Van Horn, who they could have taken for Tim Thomas and like another first rounder and some other guy.
Tim Thomas, Knicks legend. Yeah, man. I mean, it's so frustrating now in 2020, but I have to put myself in 1990. When was this rumor? 2000 something. And Larry Hughes was a nice player, and T-Mac was very young but awesome already. And Larry Hughes and a number 1 pick seems like a lot in that moment, because I thought Hughes was going to be a baller. He ended up being serviceable, but I see how that played out if I put my mind there. Hindsight, it seems ridiculous. But
Hughes was dealt in his second season in the trade for Tony Kukoc. Maybe not. I don't know. I believe that's the case, though. I think it was Hughes and returned Kukoc, who was then later dealt from Mutombo. This was a long time ago. This is like 20 years ago. I believe that's what it was, because I did not look up all these transactions, but that's what it feels like. So Hughes was not in Philly for a long time. And if they were willing to trade him for
before
Tony
you go
Kukoc,
on, do you think his tenure was so short because of the vibes at the time? Because him and Iverson were like ESPN. Remember that photo of them driving and Hughes has the wheel? Like
best.
That was awesome. Did Atiba take that photo? Anyway,
I don't know, but that's a classic photo. No, isn't it like a selfie?
No,
I think it's a selfie. It's
thought it was-
Iverson. It's Iverson or Hughes, one of the two, reaching their arm out of the window of the car. It's like pre-selfie before we even knew what a selfie was.
I thought it was
Iverson
the car.
invented the selfie.
Oh, you're right. I'm looking at it right now. He's reaching and touching the camera.
AI, inventor of the selfie. See, that's why Steve Nash doesn't even know what a selfie is.
Iverson's a selfie logo, man. Awesome photo, but they had something that the NBA was scared of at the time.
I mean, it could have been that, or it could have been that Larry Brown was the Sixers coach, and that was a lot of youth and cornrows to have on the same roster at the same time.
Dude, I'm looking at a menacing photo of Iverson, Hughes, and Tim Thomas. Woo! I mean, we know how that plays out now, but at the time, I was like, let's go. Let's do this.
How did Iverson not end up with the Knicks for like a small smidgen?
I wonder this because all the Knicks greats, like I think the BMM is claiming. Oh no, the Brooklyn Nets are claiming Garnett as their first Hall of Famer, which is great because in that case the Knicks have a doozy, a plethora of Hall of Famers.
Knicks greats such as Jalen Rose and Steve Francis,
Tracy McGrady, Baron Davis, Chauncey Billups, Mr. Big Shot New York himself. But yeah, how did Iverson not end up on the Knicks? I have no idea. How is Thaddeus Young not on the Knicks? Who knows? How come we don't have Andrew Wiggins? These are all questions I'll never have the answers for.
no one will ever know.
No one will know. No one will know. They should be, but they're not.
But yeah, I do wish, for obvious reasons, that trade had gone through. That would have been amazing because T-Mac, not only was he one of the best players of his generation, but putting him next to Allen Iverson would have been one of the most entertaining possible ways of enjoying basketball in my youth. Like,
It would have been
I'm
a
like,
cultural shift.
I've squandered years of my life not watching T-Mac and Iverson as teammates.
Yeah.
Like, that would have been insane. My life would have been immeasurably better. Instead of watching Todd McCullough and
I like Todd McCullough.
and Matt Harprings and Big Dogs.
Geiger.
OG Big Dog. I could have been watching T-Mac and Iverson. Like, why would you do that to me?
I mean, let's really talk about the joys that we were almost about to be privy to in the NBA. Not only T-Mac to the 76ers, I'm a New York guy, but like Artest in MSG. Like, how come the universe didn't give this to us? It seems unfair. I mean, LA got it. At this point, when T-Mac was rumored to go join AI, the spotlight was on Kobe and Shaq, right? Like, that was the fulcrum of the NBA.
Kobe, Shaq, Iverson, T-Mac. Come on, that's so
Incredible.
unfair.
Incredible.
That's so unfair that we didn't get that.
Yeah, there should be like a governing body above Stern and Silver, just being like, you guys have to do this because it's the best possible product we can put out.
The one thing I'm going to hang my sad hat on,
Sad hats.
no cat boys, is that I'm a little skeptical of the idea that a deal was on the table and then it didn't happen because someone got cold feet. Well, then why didn't it happen? If it was agreed to in principle, why wasn't it done?
I get cold feet all the time when I have to like order food and stuff. What do you mean?
I mean, if the Sixers and the Raptors were going to do this trade and it was established and here were the components, then why didn't it happen? Why did they say, oh, let's just hold on and think about it? And then Stephen A. Smith catches wind of it and they say, okay, we're not doing it. Why didn't it just happen?
Well, this is like the process of doing anything large, right? Like, yes, yes, yes. And then finally, when it's about to happen, your doubt comes into play. And then you reevaluate on the fly in that moment as soon as you're about to like buy a car, rent an apartment, all these things. You go through a flurry of doubts right before the transaction. And that's how it broke down, right?
Well, I guess my skepticism here is that the trade being publicized and then Stephen A. Smith being sort of blamed, credited, etc. for breaking up the deal, what does that matter if he publicized it? If you're the Raptors and you're like, yeah, Hughes in a first rounder, let's get it. And then the trade breaks and you're like, okay, cool, let's do the trade. Like, why would you be like, okay, don't do it? Like, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter to me. I think if you weren't going to if you were hesitant to do the trade anyway, Stephen A. Smith breaking the news wouldn't change your opinion. I think I'm using this to like help my soul. Is that the Raptors weren't going to do it anyway. It was discussed, but it was never like done. And the Raptors did not get cold feet because the word broke, but they got cold feet because they didn't actually really want to do it.
Man, sometimes I'll write something and labor over it for days and look at it and be like, it's done. I think it's perfect. It doesn't even need that many edits. And I'll send it off and immediately be like, oh my God, there's 3 mistakes in it. Just because it's changed context, right? Because I've sent the email and instead of looking at it in my inbox or drafts, I look at it in my outbox and I realize all these mistakes. And it's such a weird thing my brain does that I still haven't figured out. And I can sort of relate to the Raptors here being like, we like this. We like Larry Hughes. We love that pick. T-Mac's young. Anything can go. Let's do it. And then as soon as they saw Stephen A. Smith put it into words, they're like, we can't do this. T-Mac's our guy, you know? Like,
I mean, I could see that. I'm just going to salve my wounded soul by saying
dude.
that it was never going to happen anyway.
It was mean to see this get resurfaced. And
especially in a time when people are comparing Iverson to like nobodies, such as Steve Nash, like the Canadian Steve Blake. Kendall Marsher with a jumper.
In a redraft, would you take Steve Nash or Derek Fisher? 5 rings, baby.
It's just so wild, dude. It's so wild.
I know.
Man's played like his entire career next to 2 Hall of Famers at all points, or at least one.
The BMM at it again.
They're unsatiable.
Tracy McGrady on any team in that era is like unfair. If I heard Tracy McGrady was going to go to Cleveland, I'd be like, yo, you Cleveland fans are having a rough day, man. How did he move so much? How come Tracy McGrady played for like how many
injuries?
Right.
But injuries still, and he was expensive.
Expensive, totally. But, you know, he played for a bunch of teams, including New York, but I consider him a Magic, a Raptor, and a Rocket. That's T-Mac, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. So one other bit of news was that, according to a report from Woj, the NBA is trying to figure out how to do a horse competition. And this follows their dismal attempts at an NBA 2K tournament. So now they want to do something a little more IRL, and it would be horse. Now, if I look back and look at YouTubes of the horse contests from like the 70s and 80s, the NBA did this already. Yeah. And it was at All-Star games, and you can see Pistol Pete doing like behind the backs and lying on his back and shooting one-handed shots and stuff.
Where's the Iceman?
I don't think horse is ever entertaining, but I am down to watch it and give it a chance.
It's the same with the 2K thing, which took 0 money to make and was on ESPN2. But it was a bummer. It wasn't that good. These guys weren't that good at video games. There wasn't trash talking. The cameras like in their houses weren't the scenes weren't that fun. Pat Beverly came through with some trash talking. Shout out to Bev. But this has to be surrounded by some sort of creative or like cool production, right? Like, because horse is never fun, but we can make it fun. Like, could we raise the stakes like $100,000 for a charity on the letter R? You know, like something cool like that. I don't know. I've never seen an entertaining game of horse in my life.
I've played so many games of horse, and they're not even entertaining to play in. I mean, okay, if you can have Steph Curry in it and he's making half quarters, but also that lends itself to like Curry tries a half quarter and he misses. So the next guy's like, all right, well, I don't want, Curry to make another half quarter on me. So now I got to go and do some like dumb little like whirly gig shot where it's like going beneath my leg. I don't know. I just don't think that. Or if Curry makes it a half quarter, you're like, whoa. Then the other guy misses. You're like, that's an O.
Yeah, I don't get it. To give our listeners some context, I played you on a horse once this year, and you came up with a pretty amazing shot that I believe we documented on our Instagram stories.
Oh, yeah. That's my horse trump shot, yeah.
Can you describe it for our savagely, fiendishly interested listeners?
Oh, yeah. So it was based on the Andre Iguodala
very impressive
dunk contest move. where he bounced the ball off the back of the backboard and then kind of comes beneath it and dunks it. So it's exactly that without anything remotely approaching a dunk.
Yeah, you scoop the ball underneath your left leg, I believe, and then went up to a reverse layup with your right hand on the left side.
It's all very low altitude, but it's a timing thing. So you're kind of bouncing it off the back of the backboard, getting it in your left hand, quickly going underneath your left leg, and then kind of doing a right flip shot kind of into a layup.
I did not start calling you Air Ben after that, but it was a very impressive shot, I had to say. The degree of difficulty was high, dude.
Well, it's a horse masterstroke because it doesn't require any particular athleticism. But if you've never tried to do that move before,
yes.
It's completely impossible.
Is it like doing the New York Times crossword puzzle? It's not that smart people are good at it. The people who are good at it know how to do it.
Yeah, but you could, like, if someone said to me, do that same move from the other side with your other hand, I couldn't do it.
Oh, that's goofy. Yeah, I mean,
That's what
like
I'm saying. It's a
skating,
move where
that's
like
switch stance.
Like, okay, so I've never bounced the ball off the backboard in my life and tried to catch it anyway, but you're making me do it with my left hand and then going beneath my left leg, and like, you can't do it. It's not even a skill or athleticism. It's that I've done that move enough times screwing around that I can use it in horse.
Right. It's like, I can sign my name with my opposite hand. Can you? I'm like, well, no.
Yeah. So yeah, I take no credit for that move. It's just a combination of various kind of difficult things that most people could figure out if they ever tried to.
I was impressed. And also, you warned me, so I had my camera out. You were like, you're going to want this. You're going to want this on video, dude.
This is going to be gold.
It was.
Yeah, someone replied on Instagram was like that was like deeply washed and also really impressive.
Hey man, that's a very good compliment.
High praise.
I'll take that.
The highest praise I've ever received.
Did you watch the 2K tournament at all?
Nah.
You didn't miss shit. It went on for a while, and it's still going on. I think the next round is gonna drop in a few days, but people are blowing each other out. I think like DeMarcus Cousins lost by like 50 points. You got to be good at this game for this to be fun, right?
Well, we were talking about that before. Maybe some of these guys are actually good at it, and then they'll sort of sift their way through the competition of guys who are casuals, if you will. So maybe by the championship, you'll have two guys who are among the NBA's best at this game, and maybe they'll be good at it. But I don't know enough about the game or who has notoriety within the baller gamer community to even say, oh yeah, well, just wait, because like by the time Beverly gets there against, I don't know, Derek Jones Jr., those guys, that's the one you want to watch. So I don't know.
But let me be optimistic about this horse thing for a second. That's my thing today, optimism. It's Monday, let's do this. But if I turn on ESPN and they're gonna play a couple games of horse, and I see Damian Lillard in uniform and Steph Curry in uniform, I might start crying, dude. It's going to be so awesome. It's like, well, here's like Dennis Smith Jr. in Knicks uniform. I'm like, holy cow, I can't handle this emotionally, man. It's like so heavy, right?
I'm sorry, did you just mention Damian Lillard? I blacked out and everything got really fuzzy. I think I had another one of my corona attacks.
You seem so well rested, whereas 5 seconds ago you weren't as well rested.
No, I was agitated about your terrible takes, and now I'm cool as a cucumber.
Dude, it's like, but can you imagine seeing like Buddy Hield in a Kings uniform? It's such a simple image, but if I see him walk into an arena, Buddy Hield, Kings legend, it's gonna be crazy, man. I can't handle that. Yeah, let's do this. Let's do the horse tournament. Let's have everyone in uniform trying their best dunking. Let's go.
Yeah, dunks aren't allowed in horse, though.
No. Really? They can't do like 360s or anything?
Maybe you have to have a dunking bracket, and then you can have like
dunk
a
contest,
small
basically.
guy shooting bracket, because you can't say, all right, Curry, like do a 360, because you can't.
So, I mean, Curry has that wild shot where he shoots from the tunnel, right? Like, I don't even comprehend that shot at all, like over the backboard. So we're going to see a lot of that. That might be tough to watch, like people missing that shot.
But if you're a good dunker and a pretty good shooter, I don't see how anyone's able to beat you if you allow dunks.
That's very true. But what if the pairing is a good pairing? What if it's like both people are good at dunking and shooting?
Yeah, I think that would be fair. But you can't have Lillard or Curry, who are the best shooters in the NBA, and
you
have
lost
them
me.
try to
Where
and
am
have
I?
them.
Wait, did you?
What were we talking about?
I forget. I'm so rested. Go on.
Let's pick this up next week or tomorrow or whatever, however this works. Cookies.
Cookies.
I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies. I love cookies.